She mocked the poor black student with the duct-taped backpack. But on graduation day, the world gasped because he owned the university.
Morning poured like honey through the clerestory windows of Kingsley Library, igniting dust motes into tiny suns and polishing the marble floors to a mirror. Victoria Hale owned that reflection, thick and curvy in a way that made every blazer seem tailored to her hourglass on arrival. She moved with the slow confidence of a woman who had never had to ask for permission. A cream silk blouse hugged her, a camel coat draped from her shoulders like a cape, and a pair of nude heels clicked a neat metronome across the stone. Her hair, cool blonde, glossy, pinned just enough to seem accidental, framed a face built for magazine profiles and gala step-and-repeats. "V," whispered her shadow, Avery Pell, falling in at her elbow with a latte and a grin. "Board meeting at your house went late? You look like a headline." "I am a headline," Victoria said lightly, accepting the cup. "And my mother prefers salon to board meeting. It makes power sound prettier." Halston University fit her the way her blazer did. The Hale name had been carved into lintels and tucked under plaques for 3 generations. Music halls, scholarship wings, a garden where trustees whispered in spring. Her grandfather's shipping money built the bones. Her father's private equity sharpened them. Her mother's philanthropy airbrushed the edges. Victoria had grown up studying which forks to reach for and which people to reach past. They glided between study tables where students hunched over laptops and whispered in the sanctioned hush of ambition. Victoria scanned with an expert eye, sorting strangers by shoes and posture, by the careful shorthand of class she pretended not to notice and had been trained never to forget. There, at a corner table, under a brass lamp, sat the exception that irritated her. Darius Cole. His hoodie was clean but plain. His laptop was scabbed with a strip of black tape. His backpack's seam had been kissed by glue or prayer. He read with his whole body forward, pen moving in neat, relentless lines. No brand names announced him. Only focus did. Avery followed her gaze and smirked. "Still auditioning for Most Determined? I saw him bussing tables in the dining hall last night." Victoria took a sip of latte, savoring the burn. "There's a time and place for hustle. We all have roles." "Hear that?" Avery whispered. "Queen V has decreed." It wasn't cruelty, Victoria told herself. It was calibration. Halston's universe ran on influence and fluency, not merely effort. You could not buy a dialogue of power with tutoring hours. You were born into it, and if you were fortunate, trained to wield it politely. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Lunch with the Armitages next Friday. Wear navy. They like tradition." And one from her father. "Proud of you, kid. New dean wants to meet you before commencement. Optics matter." She slipped the phone away and nodded toward Darius's table. "Come on, let's say hello." They approached the way donors approach doorways, expecting them to open. Darius glanced up as their shadows crossed his page. His eyes were a dark, quiet thing. Not pleading, not prickled. Just taking the measure and finding it unremarkable. "Hi," Victoria said, one palm nesting on the back of the empty chair beside him. Her tone was warm enough to pass for friendly, and cool enough to pass for supervision. "Midterms make monks of us all." He clicked his pen closed. "Victoria." He said her name without awe, without the italics she was used to hearing. "Avery." Avery's brows jumped. "You know us." Darius's mouth tipped. "Kind of hard not to. Your names are on buildings." Victoria let the smile widen a millimeter. "Your work ethic is inspiring. I've noticed you around. If you ever need help, connections, clarity, someone who can translate dean speak, my door is always open." "Generous," he said. sliding a paper to the edge of his stack so it wouldn't bump her hand, not moving away, not flinching, just measuring. But I'm good. She blinked. Everyone needs help sometimes. True. The trick is knowing from whom. Avery shifted, the air thinning by 1 degree. Victoria inclined her head as if she hadn't heard the refusal. Well, if you change your mind, I tutor in the Hale Center conference room on Thursdays, the one with the river view. It's quieter. Quieter than the library. Impressive. She let the comment slide and pretended interest in his notes. Advanced macro? Dr. Whitaker asks for blood. He'll adore your thoroughness. Whitaker appreciates clarity, not choreography. Avery laughed too loudly and turned it into a cough. We should go. Dean's assistant sent a calendar hold. In a minute. She kept her eyes on Darius, curious despite herself. The pages nearest her wrist were lined with tidy columns, arrows, and annotations. But the letterhead peeking from beneath the notebook tugged at her attention. Not the cheap cream of campus printers, but the thick, soft paper that carried weight, even silent. She glimpsed an embossed seal before he slid the stack fully over it. "What are you working on?" she asked, letting a bright inquisitiveness lacquer the question. "You always look like you're solving the riddle behind the riddle." "Just numbers," he said, voice even. "They have a way of telling the truth when people won't." Avery rolled her eyes. Deep. "You do poetry slams too, or just cafeteria shifts?" Victoria didn't laugh. She watched him. He didn't rise to it. He didn't shrink either. There was a steadiness in him that registered like an off-key note in a familiar song, small, undeniable, impossible to ignore once heard. Her mother's voice, elegant and precise, unfurled in memory. "Remember, darling, benevolence belongs to us. The trick is to be kind without ceding ground." Her father's voice countered. "Every room is a ledger. Know who owes and who owns." Victoria tipped the chair back an inch, an unspoken claim. "Our seminar does peer sessions before presentations. If you want, purely optional. You can run your deck by me. Optics matter with Whitaker. He hates clumsy confidence. He hates dishonesty more." The words brushed against something in her ribcage, a place she didn't visit. She smoothed her blouse and pretended it was dust. Avery checked the time. We're late. 1 minute, Victoria said again, because she wasn't quite finished, and she didn't know why. She had been trained to read the room, to map who mattered. Darius didn't belong on that map. He should have been a background figure rendered in graphite, scholarship kid, earnest, temporary. Yet here he sat as solid as the table, as if the room had been drawn around him. It annoyed her. It intrigued her. It made her want to remind the space whose name it wore. She lowered into the empty chair without asking. The movement was graceful, practiced, and, in its own quiet way, aggressive. "Show me your outline," she said, sliding her latte aside to make room. "I can help you frame it so your strengths read as strategy, not survival." He studied her for a beat, then flipped his notebook shut. "I'm framing it fine." Her smile sharpened. "Suit yourself. Just don't say I didn't try." Noted. She waited for him to look away so she could stand and leave him with the memory of her shadow. He didn't. He simply held her gaze a fraction too long, not challenging, not deferent, measuring like she was a line item with footnotes. Something heat-brickle prickled at the base of her throat. She stood. "Come on, Avs." They turned, the library's hush folded around them again, the tiny suns of dust swirling in their wake. Victoria's heels reclaimed their metronome. But halfway to the rotunda, she pivoted back, unable to resist the last, precise cut that would press him into the shape she preferred to inhabit. She let her voice carry just enough to cross the table, just enough for the nearest heads to lift. "Darius," she said with the kind of smile that left no fingerprints, "if you ever want a seat at real tables, learn to accept a hand that's offered. Unless," she tilted her head, cool blonde curtain catching the light, "you're content serving them."
The lecture hall thrummed with the quiet hum of ambition, a low tide of voices and shuffling papers beneath the vaulted ceiling. Victoria Hale sat at the front, legs crossed, a fountain pen poised delicately above her leather-bound notebook. To anyone watching, she looked like what she was, Halston royalty, unbothered, prepared, immaculately in control. Yet, beneath the facade, irritation coiled. Professor Whitaker's gaze flicked toward the second row, where Darius Cole was standing, laptop propped open as he delivered his presentation. The screen behind him glowed with graphs and projections, a cascade of numbers dancing like constellations. His voice was steady, low but resonant, the kind of tone that seemed to carry weight even when the words were about currency fluctuations and emerging markets. Whitaker leaned forward in his chair, eyes narrowing with interest. "Mr. Cole, your analysis of exchange volatility between East African and Asian markets is remarkably sharp. How did you arrive at these cross-comparisons?" He clicked to the next slide. "I started by tracking institutional flows rather than national ones. Corporations and hedge funds often move money differently than governments. If you map those flows instead of stopping at central bank policy, you see where the cracks begin." The professor's expression warmed. "Impressive, very impressive." A ripple of whispers spread across the room. Students scribbled notes furiously. Victoria's jaw tightened. She had spent weeks preparing her presentation, weeks pulling strings, borrowing insider reports from her father's contacts, polishing every word with Avery until it gleamed. And here was Darius, standing there with his patched backpack at his feet and a discount laptop, drawing admiration like it cost nothing. When the applause came, it was louder than it should have been. Victoria's smile held firm, but her pen pressed too hard against the page, a blot of ink spreading like a bruise. Her turn came 30 minutes later. She rose gracefully, a silk scarf tied at her throat, and crossed to the front of the room with a poise that had been rehearsed since childhood. Her slides were sleek, the charts crisp, the fonts curated. "Today, I'll be discussing global liquidity shocks and their long-term implications for developed markets." Her voice was cool, confident, carrying a faint Boston drawl that made her sound older, more established. She spoke of risk models, leveraged assets, and international lending strategies. She quoted white papers, cited economists by first name as if they were personal acquaintances. And when she finished, the applause was polite, measured. Professor Whitaker nodded. "Well done, Miss Hale. A sound presentation, though I would have liked to see more original analysis. Still, your sources are, thorough." The compliment stung. Sources, connections. She heard the subtle dismissal beneath the civility. And worse, when she returned to her seat, she caught sight of Darius. He wasn't smirking, wasn't even watching her with contempt. He simply looked thoughtful, as if he had already moved past her performance and was weighing something entirely different in his mind. The insult of indifference was sharper than any sneer. Later, in the hallway, Victoria found her path narrowing until it intersected with his. Students streamed around them, chatter bouncing off the stone walls, but the moment felt strangely still. "Darius," she called, her voice warm but layered with steel. He paused, adjusting the strap of his battered backpack, eyes flicking up with quiet patience. "I wanted to say, your presentation was ambitious. Admirable, really, considering your background." "My background?" "Well, yes." She tilted her head, blonde hair spilling forward like silk. "It must be challenging, coming from different circumstances, navigating this place without the same resources others have." He studied her face, calm as a chess player choosing a piece. "Different circumstances." She laughed softly, a sound polished at charity galas. Don't misunderstand. It's a compliment. You've done remarkably well. If you ever need... She gestured with the pen in her hand. Guidance, tutoring, introductions. I'd be happy to help. I know how daunting Halston can be if you're not used to its world. His gaze didn't waver. I manage fine. Her smile faltered for a half-second, then returned sharper. Of course, pride can be useful in small doses. Just don't let it hold you back. I don't call it pride. I call it dignity. The words caught her off guard. Dignity. She felt Avery's presence at her shoulder, heard her friend's soft giggle. Darius, you're lucky. Victoria's offering to help. Not everyone gets that. He looked at Avery, then back at Victoria, and nodded once. I'll keep that in mind. He turned and walked away. And for reasons she couldn't name, her throat felt tight, as though she had swallowed glass. That night, back in her suite, she poured herself a glass of wine and stood at the wide dormitory window, the city glittering beyond. Avery sprawled across her couch, phone in hand, recounting the day's gossip. Everyone's still buzzing about his presentation. Can you imagine? Scholarship boys stealing the spotlight in Whitaker's seminar? Victoria swirled the wine, watching the deep red cling to the glass. It was competent. It was impressive. Avery arched a brow. Don't downplay it. Even Whitaker seemed shocked. He's usually only impressed by donations. Victoria set the glass down with more force than intended. He's one student, one semester. It won't matter. Connections decide the future, always have. Avery smirked. Tell that to the whispers. Some of the professors actually think he could graduate top of the class. Imagine that headline. Victoria's chest tightened again. A headline. The word hit too close. She had always been the headline. Her name on invitations, her family on plaques, her reputation a guarantee. And yet today, in that room, for a fleeting moment she had been a footnote. The thought made her blood run hot. She drank the glass. The days stretched into weeks. In classes, in hallways, at late-night study groups, Darius's presence pressed at the edges of her awareness. He never flaunted his intelligence, but professors praised his insight, students began to seek him out, and even campus chatter shifted. She noticed the way he sat with students she had never thought twice about. First-generation kids, international scholars, those who lived in the cheaper dorms by the river. He spoke to them with the same steady voice he had used in class, as if their opinions mattered. As if power wasn't a finite commodity to hoard, but something that could be multiplied by being shared. It disturbed her, because in some dark, unacknowledged place, it made her wonder if perhaps she had been wrong. But wrongness was not a language Victoria Hale had ever been taught to speak. So she doubled down. She smiled brighter, laughed louder, performed perfection with a precision born of lineage. She mocked his patched backpack when he passed, raised her brows at his thrift store shoes, whispered with Avery about his 3 part-time jobs. And yet, late at night, staring at her textbooks, she heard his voice again. I call it dignity. The word lingered like perfume on silk. And though she told herself she despised him, the truth was worse. She could not stop noticing him.
The rain tapped softly against the leaded windows of Kingsley Library, streaking the glass with silver, as if the sky itself were riding over the ancient panes. Victoria Hale pushed through the heavy oak doors, her heels biting against the marble floor, her camel coat slung across one arm. She had reserved the exclusive reading room for herself and Avery to prepare for their senior thesis defense. Privacy mattered. Appearance mattered. The Hale name carried weight here, and she meant to remind anyone who forgot. But the moment she stepped into the hushed chamber, her breath caught. Someone was already there. At the long oak table beneath the oil portraits of long-dead benefactors sat Darius Cole. His shoulders hunched slightly over a stack of papers, lamplight catching the hard angles of his jaw. His patched backpack lay slumped beside the chair, but the documents spread before him were anything but ordinary. Letterheads shimmered faintly even from where Victoria stood, thick, embossed, expensive. Her irritation surged. "Excuse me," she said sharply, her voice carrying against the vaulted ceiling. "This room is reserved." "The reservation doesn't start for another hour. I checked with the librarian." Victoria raised her chin. "The reservation is under the Hale name. I need this space now. My work is important." For a moment he said nothing. Then he shifted a single page aside with deliberate calm. "I'm sure it is," he replied evenly. "So is mine." Something in the tone unsettled her, but irritation disguised it. She strode forward, heels echoing, and stopped at the table's edge. Her gaze flicked across his papers before he could shield them. Her eyes snagged on bold headers. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Houston University Board of Trustees. Figures followed, staggering sums, 7 digits bleeding across the page. These weren't coursework spreadsheets. These were institutional accounts, endowment management. Her brows arched. "Are you working on some kind of project about university finances?" He began gathering the papers, but she caught another flash. His name, printed neatly at the bottom of one letter. Darius Cole. Amusement softened her irritation into something sharper. "Fascinating," she drawled, "playing pretend with big numbers. Good practice, I suppose. Maybe one day you'll make middle management at a small firm." The words were honeyed, but she knew they landed like glass. Darius rose slowly. His height eclipsed her, a quiet force that drew the air taut. Yet there was no anger in his eyes. Something heavier, steadier, as though he carried truths she hadn't earned the right to touch. "You know, Victoria," he said quietly, his voice soft as a knife sliding free of its sheath, "you've made a lot of assumptions about me over the years." "Have I?" "Every single one of them," he murmured, "has been wrong." Before she could answer, the door opened. Avery breezed in, tossing her raincoat onto a chair. Finally, traffic was murder. "Oh." She glanced from Victoria to Darius, sensing tension like static. "Everything okay?" Darius stacked his papers with a precision that looked practiced, almost ritual. "I'll leave you to your work." Victoria tried to ignore the sting of his calm dismissal, but as he passed, she caught one last glimpse of those documents. Sums, signatures, endowment seals, and her stomach turned as if the floor had shifted under her. That night, she lay awake in her dormitory suite, the rain's rhythm replaced by the thrum of her racing thoughts. Her textbook sprawled open, her thesis untouched. Her reflection in the dark window stared back, green eyes narrowed. She replayed the scene over and over, the letterheads, the numbers, his name printed like it belonged on documents her father handled with hushed reverence. Avery lounged on the Persian rug, painting her nails crimson. Still brooding about the charity case. "It wasn't like that," Victoria muttered. "It's always like that." Avery smirked, blowing on her nails. "He probably volunteers as a research assistant. Professors throw scraps to kids like him. Makes them feel noble." The explanation should have satisfied her. It didn't. Darius hadn't looked like an assistant fumbling with borrowed paperwork. He'd reviewed those documents with the familiarity of someone who belonged to them. "Don't let him rattle you," Avery went on. "He's not our world, V. He never will be." Victoria said nothing, but when she closed her eyes, she saw again the calm weight in his gaze, the way he said every assumption was wrong. The next afternoon, Professor Whitaker asked her to deliver a folder to Darius. Annoyance flared, but she complied, heels striking the polished floor of the administrative building. She spotted him emerging from a conference room marked Board of Trustees, Private. Confusion spiked. "What were you doing in there?" He paused, weighing her, as if deciding how much truth she could handle. "Following up on university business." "What kind of business?" she pressed. He gestured toward an alcove. "Can we talk privately?" Against her better judgment, she followed. They sat on a stone bench beneath the leaded window. Sunlight spilled dappled patterns across the floor. Darius leaned forward. "Victoria, I'm going to tell you something, but you have to listen." Her chest tightened. "Fine. When we first met, you made assumptions about my clothes, my backpack, the jobs I worked. You assumed you knew my story." She bristled. "I never—" "Yes, you did," he said gently but firmly. "And you treated me according to those assumptions, as if I was beneath you, as if my presence here was charity." The truth of it burned. He pulled out his phone, thumbed the screen, and handed it to her. An article headline glared up from the Houston Crimson. "Anonymous donor provides record $75 million gift to university endowment." Her brows drew together. "What does this have to do with you?" That donor chose to remain anonymous, but the gift was earmarked for scholarships, for facility renovations, for the expansion of programs students like you benefit from every day. Her throat dried. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying you might want to rethink who you believe really belongs here." Her eyes flicked from the phone to his steady face. "You're lying." He didn't flinch. "Why would I?" Because she needed him to be. Because if he wasn't, the foundations of her world, the neat hierarchy her family built, began to crumble. "You let me treat you like—" The words caught. "Like what? Like someone beneath you?" Her heart thudded painfully. Before she could respond, Avery's voice echoed down the hall, calling her name. Victoria shoved the phone back into his hand, her composure fraying. He stood, sliding the device into his pocket. "One day," he said quietly, "you'll see. And when you do, you'll realize every assumption you made was your own cage." Then he walked away, leaving her breathless, clutching the stone bench as if it might hold her steady. That night, Victoria couldn't sleep. She tossed beneath silk sheets, Avery's chatter a faint hum in the background. Her mind returned to his calm certainty, the glimpse of his name on those documents, the audacity of his composure. Something in her had cracked. For the first time in her life, Victoria Hale wondered if perhaps her world, the one her parents told her was immutable, was nothing more than a carefully gilded illusion. And Darius Cole, the boy she'd mocked as a scholarship case, might just be the key to shattering it.
The days following her confrontation with Darius blurred into one long ache of unease. Victoria Hale moved through Halston University like a ghost wrapped in designer silk, smiling at professors, laughing at Avery's jokes, attending luncheons with her parents' circle. Outwardly, nothing had changed, yet beneath the surface, something had cracked, and she could not ignore the sound of it. Everywhere she turned, there he was, Darius Cole, the student she had once dismissed as a charity case, now seen in whispered corners of the administrative building, in conversations with deans, in the company of trustees. And each time their eyes met, his calm, level gaze cut through her polished armor. It was not a gaze of superiority, not even of disdain. It was worse. It was a gaze that measured her and found her lacking. At first, Victoria fought the discomfort the way she had been trained to fight anything, by doubling down. She mocked his patched backpack more loudly than before. She smirked when she saw him in the dining hall, her words sharp enough for others to hear. She told Avery, "He's obviously positioning himself for a scholarship story. Professors love that sort of thing." But at night, when the chandeliers dimmed and Avery's chatter faded into the silence of her dorm suite, Victoria found herself staring into the mirror, her reflection suddenly strange. "Is this who I am?" she wondered. "Is this all I am?" Her parents noticed the change, of course. They always did. "Darling," her mother's voice drifted through the phone one evening, cool and clipped, "I've been hearing troubling things. That you've been seen spending time with that Cole boy. Surely that's exaggerated." Victoria sat on the edge of her bed, nails pressing into her palms. "He's in several of my classes, Mother. It's not unusual." "You know what I mean," her mother said sharply. "You are a Hale.
You cannot afford associations that might tarnish your reputation. People will talk. They already do, Victoria murmured before she could stop herself. Her mother inhaled, the sound thin and sharp. Do not test me, Victoria. Your father has worked too hard to secure our place here. We did not raise you to throw it away on some distraction. Later that week, her father called as well. His voice was steadier, but no less firm. Victoria, the Sterling and Armitage families have been asking questions. I expect you to be smart about this. Remember, optics matter. Don't let sentiment cloud your judgment. She hung up, with her heart pounding, unable to shake the sour taste their words left behind. Even Avery turned her concern into derision. Over brunch at their favorite Back Bay Cafe, she leaned across the table, her voice low but sharp. V, whatever game Cole is playing, you're falling for it. He's using you. That's what people like him do. They see an opening and they take it. Don't be naive. Victoria stirred her coffee without drinking it. What if he doesn't need me? What if he never did? Avery stared as if Victoria had spoken a foreign language. Don't be ridiculous. Look at him. Look at us. We're the ones who belong here. But Victoria wasn't sure anymore. The breaking point came at the senior formal dinner held in Halston's Great Hall. The room glittered with candlelight reflecting off chandeliers, crystal glasses clinking softly as the future elite of America toasted themselves. Professors and administrators lined the high table, their faces composed, their conversations deliberate. Victoria sat at her family's traditional table, surrounded by Avery, Robert Ashford, and the rest of their set. They laughed about internships in New York, joked about ski trips in Aspen, spoke casually of hedge funds and mergers as though they were hobbies. But she wasn't listening. Her eyes had drifted across the hall to where Darius sat, not alone, but surrounded by students she had once not noticed. International scholars, first-generation Americans, students who juggled jobs with coursework. They leaned toward him, laughing, their faces alight with something that looked like belonging. And when his gaze lifted to hers, he didn't smile, not even sneer. He simply nodded, as if to say, "You know what you need to do." The thought lodged in her chest and refused to let go. Before she realized what she was doing, Victoria rose to her feet. Her chair scraped softly against the marble, her heels clicking as she crossed the hall. Conversation dwindled. Heads turned. "Victoria," Avery hissed, confusion written across her perfect features. "What are you doing?" But Victoria didn't answer. She reached Darius's table, her breath trembling, her heart pounding against her ribs. Dozens of eyes were on her. Professors paused mid-sentence. Even the dean's fork hovered above his plate. "Darius, I owe you an apology." Her voice carried farther than she intended. The room went silent. Darius looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do," Victoria said firmly, though her hands trembled. "For 4 years, I treated you with disrespect. I mocked you, I dismissed you, I assumed I was better than you because of my family's money. I thought I understood who belonged at this university. And I was wrong." The silence thickened. She could feel the weight of the professor's eyes, the sharp curiosity of her peers, the disapproval radiating from Avery across the room. But she pressed on. "I was wrong about what makes someone valuable, wrong about what it means to truly belong here. I've learned from you more than I have from any class I've ever taken. You've shown grace, dignity, and strength I never imagined. And I wish," her voice cracked, "I wish I could be half the person you are." Her throat burned, her hands ached with tension, and in that silence she wondered if she had just destroyed herself. But then slowly, Darius rose to his feet. He was taller than she remembered, his presence steady and unshaken. He didn't smile, not at first. He simply looked at her as though seeing her for the very first time. And then, gently, his expression softened into something warm, transformative. "Thank you," he said simply. That took courage. The applause began softly, a scattering of claps from the far tables. Then it spread, growing louder until the hall echoed with it. Professors nodded, students stared. Even those who disapproved could not deny the power of the moment. Victoria's cheeks burned, but for the first time, the heat wasn't shame, it was release. When she returned to her table, Avery's face was pale with shock. Robert Ashford gaped at her. But Victoria didn't care. Across the room, Darius had sat again, his composure unbroken, his nod to her subtle but real. And for the first time in her life, Victoria Hale realized she had chosen to stand on her own, not because of her name, not because of her family, but because it was right. The girl who had once believed herself untouchable had just touched the truth, and she could never go back. The morning of graduation dawned crisp and perfect, as though the New England sky had been painted for postcards. The lawn of Houston University stretched wide and green, rows of white folding chairs sat in perfect symmetry across Harvard Yard. Crimson banners hung from the old brick facades, stirring in the light breeze. Families gathered in clusters, fathers in tailored suits, mothers in pearls and summer dresses, siblings clutching cameras. Victoria Hale stood among them in her black gown and cap, the gold stole draped over her shoulders, marking her as one of the elite graduates. Her parents flanked her, regal as ever, their pride sharpened into expectation. Avery clung to her arm, whispering gossip about who was seated where, which families were exchanging glances, whose name would be announced with the greatest applause. But Victoria barely heard her. Her gaze kept searching through the crowd, drawn again and again to one figure seated apart from the rest. Darius Cole, robed like the others, but with a dignity that seemed to shine brighter than the morning sun. He didn't fidget, didn't preen, didn't lean into conversation. He sat tall, composed, as if he already knew the day belonged to him. And maybe, Victoria thought, it did. Her stomach fluttered. She hadn't spoken to him since the dinner in the Great Hall, where her apology had shaken the walls of her carefully constructed world. Since then, the campus had buzzed with whispers. Who was Darius, really? Why did professors defer to him? Why did administrators meet with him in hushed tones? Theories spread like wildfire, each more improbable than the last. The answer was coming today. She felt it like a storm on the horizon. The ceremony began with the usual pomp. Speeches from deans, applause for distinguished alumni, the hum of bagpipes rolling through the courtyard. Names were called, diplomas handed out, photographs taken, parents wept, students cheered. Then, at last, the university president stepped to the podium, her robe trailing behind her, her voice amplified across the yard. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce to you the next president of Houston University. For over a century, this institution has been shaped by leaders of vision and integrity. Today, history is being made again. Our next president is not only a Rhodes Scholar, but also the youngest to ever hold this office. Please welcome Dr. Darius Cole." The world seemed to tilt. The applause was thunderous, an eruption of cheers and disbelief. Students stood, families craned their necks, the air vibrating with the weight of revelation. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. She had expected something, some revelation of importance, but this was unimaginable. She watched as Darius rose from his seat, his robe flowing as he walked to the podium. The crowd roared, but he didn't bask in it. His expression remained steady, his dark eyes focused, his stride calm. He carried himself not like someone stepping into power, but like someone who always belonged in it. When he reached the microphone, the noise subsided, replaced by a silence thick with awe. 4 years ago, Darius began, his voice resonant and sure, I came to Houston not just as a student, but as the grandson of a man who broke barriers here in the 1950s, the son of a man who expanded our family's legacy, and as someone entrusted with carrying it forward. For years, my family has supported this university quietly, through scholarships and donations, believing that education is the bridge between what we are born into and what we can become. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Victoria's pulse hammered in her ears. My name has never been secret, Darius continued, but I allowed assumptions to remain unchallenged. Some saw me as less, as undeserving, as out of place. I did not correct them, because I wanted to see this place through the eyes of those who must fight harder to belong. And what I saw changed me. His gaze swept the crowd, and for a heartbeat, locked with hers. I learned that leadership is not about the advantages you inherit, but how you use them. It's about lifting others, about building bridges instead of walls. And as I take this responsibility, I promise to honor not just the legacy of my family, but the dreams of every student who has ever felt unseen. Applause surged again, rolling like thunder. Victoria barely moved, her hands clutched at the edge of her gown, her eyes stinging. She had mocked him, diminished him, dismissed him as a charity case. And here he stood, revealed as the very soul of the university, the man who owned not just its buildings and endowment, but its future. After the ceremony, the yard dissolved into chaos, families embracing, cameras flashing, laughter and tears mixing in the bright summer air. Victoria found herself moving through it like someone underwater, searching. And then she saw him. Darius stood near Massachusetts Hall, his robe unfastened, greeting a line of professors and trustees. His family surrounded him, faces radiant with pride, their resemblance clear in the set of their jaws and the dignity of their posture. Victoria hesitated, nerves tangling in her chest. What could she say? What words could possibly matter after everything? But then he turned, and their eyes met. The crowd seemed to fall away. She crossed the lawn, her heels sinking slightly into the grass, her cap slipping askew. When she reached him, her voice trembled. "Congratulations, Dr. Cole." "Thank you," he said, his smile gentle, warm. "And, Victoria, what you said the other night, it meant something." She shallowed hard. "It should have meant something 4 years ago." "Maybe," he allowed, "but growth comes when it's meant to, not when we plan it." Silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She drew a shaky breath. "I was wrong about you, about everything. And I don't know if you can ever forgive me." His eyes softened. "Victoria, forgiveness isn't a gift you earn. It's a bridge you cross when you're ready. And I think you're ready." Tears pricked her lashes. She nodded. 3 months later, autumn leaves blazed crimson and gold across the campus. In the president's office at Massachusetts Hall, Victoria carried 2 cups of coffee, her staff badge swinging from her lanyard, Assistant Director of Student Outreach. "Busy morning?" she asked, setting 1 cup on his desk. Darius looked up from a stack of proposals, his face lighting with the smile she'd come to treasure. "Always. But it's good busy. We're expanding scholarships for first-generation students from rural towns." Victoria sank into the chair opposite him, still amazed by the twists that had led her here. "That's wonderful." He leaned back, studying her. "Any regrets?" "Only that it took me so long to see what was right in front of me," she admitted softly. He reached across the desk, taking her hand. "Some lessons take time. What matters is we found our way here." She squeezed his hand, her heart steady for the first time in years. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Darius said, his voice rich with certainty. "All of you, even the parts that had to grow." Outside, the bells of Memorial Church tolled the hour, their sound spilling across the yard where students of every background hurried to class. The university, like its new president and the woman beside him, was changing, becoming stronger, not by clinging to old hierarchies, but by embracing the truth that dignity and greatness could rise from anywhere. Victoria smiled through her tears, knowing she had finally stepped into the life she was meant to live, and this time it was on her own terms.